Today's lesson is going to be about the comparison of adjectives and adverbs. Before we can start comparing adjectives and adverbs, however, we need to make sure we really understand what is an adjective and what is an adverb. What do they do in sentences? Okay. We're going to start with adjectives. Adjectives have one purpose or one job. The same way you can say a student has one job, to study. A teacher has one job, to teach. An adjective has one job, which is to describe nouns or pronouns only. Okay? The way we identify adjectives in a sentence is we ask these questions. What kind, which one, how many, how much? You have to memorize these 4 questions so that you can identify adjectives in a sentence easily. Okay? Adjectives are usually found right before the noun they describe. Sometimes they're found after a linking verb. If they come after a linking verb, they have a special name called a predicate adjective. Now let's look at our example sentence. Those emojis are wearing bright, colorful flowers. We look at the word emojis. It is a noun. We ask the question, which one? Which emojis? And the answer is those. So we know those is an adjective describing emojis. This is one of our demonstrative adjectives. We have 4 demonstrative adjectives: this, that, these, those. If we look at the end of the sentence, we have flowers, which are a noun. We can ask what kind of flowers, and the answer is bright flowers, colorful flowers. So here we have 2 different adjectives describing the same noun. And let's look at one more example. Okay. Here's a sentence. The wise, handsome owl had orange eyes. You should pause the video here and see if you can identify all the adjectives in the sentence. There are 3 adjectives in this sentence. Wise, handsome, both describing the owl, and orange describing the eyes. You should also be able to figure out which question is being answered by these adjectives. Here it is the question, what kind? What kind of owl? A wise, handsome owl. What kind of eyes? Orange eyes. And you have to remember that adjectives modify nouns and pronouns only. That's their only function. Now we're going to take a look at adverbs. Adverbs have a little hint in them. They have the word verb. So that tells us that adverbs modify verbs. But adverbs, unlike adjectives, have 3 jobs. They don't do just one thing, they do 3 things. The same way you can think of maybe your mom has 3 jobs. Maybe she's a teacher, a parent, and she's your family cook. All right? So your mom might have 3 different jobs. Adverbs have 3 different jobs. They modify verbs. That's why they're called adverbs. They also modify adjectives. And they can describe other adverbs. We're going to look at an example for each one. Before we look at examples, we need to remember that the questions that help us find adverbs are where, when, how, and to what extent. Again, these questions should be memorized so that you are able to easily identify adverbs in a sentence. Now, the first 3 example sentences are all modifying the verb flew. So here's a verb. Flew, we're describing what the owl is doing. So this is my action. The owl flew quietly. How did he fly? Quietly. Yesterday the owl flew. When did the flying happen? Yesterday. The owl flew here. Where did the flying happen? Here. Now we want to look at 2 more example sentences. The owl flew very quietly. Here we have an adverb that's modifying another adverb. How quietly did the owl fly? Very quietly. Here we have an adverb modifying an adjective. To what extent is the owl wise? Is it extremely wise? Is it just a little bit wise? Is it slightly wise? This gives us the degree of wisdom that the owl has. So we say, to what extent is the owl wise? And the answer is extremely. So this is an adverb modifying an adjective. Here we have an adverb modifying another adverb. And up here we have 3 adverbs modifying the verb flew. And we're going to look at one more example before we move on. Okay, here we have a sentence. The extremely cute koala hugged its mom very tightly. You should pause the video, try to identify the 3 adverbs in the sentence. Also try to figure out what questions are they answering and what words are they modifying. Okay, we've identified 3 different adverbs. Extremely, very, and tightly. Tightly modifies a verb, hugged. Extremely modifies an adjective, cute. Very modifies another adverb. All right, remember, adverbs do 3 different things. They modify verbs, they modify adjectives, and they also modify other adverbs. So they have 3 jobs that they can do. Adjectives have only one job, which is to modify nouns or pronouns. Adverbs have 3 jobs. They modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. Now, let's talk about how we can use them for comparison purposes. Many adjectives and adverbs have different degrees. We call them positive, comparative, and superlatives. These are just fancy ways of saying that we can describe something, we can compare it to a different thing, or we can compare it to many things. The first, which is positive, is no comparison. So we can say California is hot, the girl is smart, the table is blue, the water is cold. So every time we use an adjective or an adverb and we're not really comparing things, we call it positive. When we compare 2 different things, then we say it's a comparative use of a modifier. Tahiti is hotter than California. So now I'm comparing 2 things. Whenever we're comparing 2 things, we often see the word than. Okay? Not always, but many times. So this is like a little hint. Right? If you're comparing 2 things, you'll usually see the word than. Something is hotter than something else. Someone is taller than someone else. Okay? So we use the comparative degree when we're talking about comparing 2 things. The superlative degree is when we're comparing more than 2 things. The desert is the hottest. So now we're comparing the desert to all other places. So we say hottest. We use the superlative degree. Now, there's different ways that we change adverbs and adjectives when we're using comparative and superlative. We can use ER or EST when we have 1-syllable adjectives and adverbs. Okay, so if we have tall, we use taller and tallest. Small, we use smaller and smallest. Late, later, and latest. So here we're only adding the endings. Okay. EST or ER. And this is, again, 1-syllable adjectives and adverbs. If it's only 1 syllable, then we know it's easy. We just add ER or EST. And again, positive, Tanya arrived late. We're not really comparing Tanya to anybody else. This is a positive use of an adverb. Beth arrived later than Tanya. Now we're comparing Beth's arrival time with Tanya's arrival time. So we're going to use the comparative, which adds an ER. Now, Trisha arrived latest of all and missed the flight. Here we're comparing Trisha to many people. So we use EST or the superlative form of the adverb. When we have 2-syllable modifiers, then we have to do something a little bit different, or we have to approach the adjectives and adverbs a little bit different. Let's take a look at our examples first. Dirty, honest, slowly, gently. Each of these adjectives and adverbs has 2 syllables, right? When we have 2-syllable modifiers, then we have the option of either adding ER or adding the word more to form the comparative. Or we can add EST or most to form the superlative. Let's take a look at our examples. So we have 4 examples here, and you have additional examples in your book. Dirty becomes dirtier in the comparative form and dirtiest in the superlative form. So here we're adding ER and EST. For honest, we're going to add more and most. For slowly, we're going to add more and most. For gently, we're going to add more and most. Many adverbs end in ly. Not all adverbs, but many adverbs end in ly. The adverbs that end in ly, you're always going to add more or most to form the comparative and superlative. If your adverb or adjective just ends in y, like dirty, then sometimes you have to change the spelling. You see, we changed the y to an I and added er. Here we changed the y to an I before adding est. So you have to be careful, and if you're really not sure about the spelling of the comparative or superlative, look it up in the dictionary or look it up online to be sure. Now, one of our last categories is words that are a little bit longer, that have 3 or more syllables. Okay, interesting, 4 syllables. Recently, 3 syllables. Here, we only have the option of adding more or most. We don't add er or est to 3 or 4 syllable words. So interesting becomes more interesting and most interesting. Recently becomes more recently or most recently. Let's take a look at some of our example sentences. So here we have the doctor was interesting. Positive. The scientist was more interesting than the doctor. Here we're comparing the scientist and the doctor. So we're comparing two things. We use the comparative form and we add the word more. The epidemiologist was the most interesting to listen to. Here we're comparing the epidemiologist to, let's say, all the experts. So we're comparing it, or him or her, to we're comparing more than 2 things. So we have to use the superlative form or the word most. Now, the last thing we want to remember is to avoid double comparisons. What that means is that you cannot add er and more to any one adjective or adverb. Same way you cannot add est and most together to one adjective or adverb. So if you were to write a sentence like this, he was the most bravest firefighter, it is incorrect. We do not want most and est. You have to choose one. If you put both, it's called a double comparison, and it is grammatically incorrect. The correct way to write the sentence was, he was the bravest firefighter.